This is Gail Grader from EdTech Times, and I am here with
Furqan Nazeeri, and I'm a partner at Extension Engine.
And we are at the Learn Launch 2017 conferences, and we're going to talk today about the online world of education and what the future of education will look like with a lot of the new trends that we're seeing from personalized education to competency-based education, etc. So why don't we start with a brief description as to what your company does and your role there.
Sure. So I work at Extension Engine. We're a team of about 200 experts in online learning, and we do what we call custom learning experiences. So we work with a client and we help build a unique platform, unique program that's designed specifically for a learner, subject material, and platform that could even be custom itself. And we've been doing this for 15 years. I'm a partner there, and I've been there for 8 years. And I think the thing that's most interesting to me, and I think we'll see that here today at Learn Launch, is in the last 3 years, we've done at Extension Engine something like 70 or 80 projects for clients where we build a custom learning experience. Each one is actually completely unique. But what we see is themes that go through those, themes that are, I think, trends in online learning or learning generally. And it's always fun to go to conferences like this and kind of see some of those themes and how they pop out. And so one of them is what we call active learning. Mm-hmm. So gone are the days where in the online world you would just film a play and call it a movie. So you don't just video a professor in front of a chalkboard and put it online. What we do, and you see a lot of it now, is very active learning, simulations, student-to-student interactions, negotiations, even actual projects where you'll work over a period of time to develop and demonstrate mastery of principles that you learn and engage with the material and the instructor. The other thing that I think is really interesting online is the social engagement aspect of it. And oftentimes those are really interwoven with the activity-based, so you're doing group project-based learning. It was funny, this past weekend, I'm a guinea pig for one of our clients, and I was testing out a course on negotiations, and I actually had a negotiation over the weekend with a fellow student who happened to be in Kampala, Uganda. So really exciting stuff. Lots of social engagement. And the third area I think is quite interesting is personalization. And that's where over a spectrum we see platforms, everything from like Newton or Watson style, behavioral, where each student gets a different path through the material, up to what we call personalization, where you'll create, known linear learning paths where it might be for an advanced student or a beginner student, things like that. So there's some really interesting trends going on, and I look forward to seeing those here.
So the keynote speaker today already spoke about some of the trends you just referenced, where he said the way we have classrooms today, where we graduate students from one year to the next based on age, that in 20 years, he said it'll take a generation, will probably be very different. We will have classrooms based around mastery. And whether you call it active learning or inquiry learning, the classroom will look very different. And some of the social aspects he raised that you can't forget, the relationships, whether in the classroom or outside the classroom, that are supportive. And the last thing he did speak about was obviously the personalization, which now with technology and platforms like yours, where you can actually see the personalization effect, where we're absolutely in this trend of this and moving towards the whole competency ed or competency-based model. So one of the things when you and I were talking earlier that I thought was really interesting was the way that your approach to constructing courses. I'd love for you to speak about that, because an earlier question I asked you was about what are the limitations that you see with technology today that may prevent your team and even companies from doing the kinds of programming and any kind of future vision that you have or what you can bring to the market, some of those limitations with technology. And the way you describe your approach I thought was really interesting. So if you could speak to that, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Even 10 years ago, certainly 5 years ago, the technology was often the hardest part of creating an online learning experience, and that's changed quite a bit. And so our approach, instead of saying, hey, here's a platform, and then can I pour some content into that and then drag some students over and plug them in, what we do is we try to look at who's the learner, what are their learning objectives, who's the instructor or the subject matter expert, and then we craft a platform that's unique to that learning experience. And it's a very different way of thinking about things. It allows us to rethink, so no longer are we constrained to what's called the tyranny of the clock. We don't have to put students on a single learning path and shepherd them all along as a group. What we can do is create personalization. We can allow students to progress through at their own pace, and some are faster, some are slower. Funny enough, there's no such thing as an average student. And what I think is most interesting about this, and I work with a lot of clients, and the students, the learners, they're ready for personalized learning. That's what they want. They love it. They get it, every day from their teachers and in their homes. And so when we go online, I think it's incumbent upon us to be able to give that to them. The challenge with personalized learning is actually not with the learners. It's actually with the infrastructure. It's with the platforms. It's with the authors of content. And that's actually where we spend most of our time, is trying to bend that back to the learner's needs.
Right, and maybe perhaps some of the administrators and their mindset about how things should be delivered. Maybe they aren't where the market is going, and it's a bit of education on your part, I'm sure.
It's definitely true. I think the what we call the business of learning is a really interesting, and in fact, a lot of the innovation, believe it or not, happens at the intersection of pedagogy and the business of learning. Because let's face it, I mean, at the end of the day, when we're delivering learning to a student, somebody has to pay for that. And so we need to do that in a way where we're getting the most impact for those learners. And so oftentimes we have to take a step back and look at costs and look at infrastructure and incentives. And it's funny, this is no joke, this is an actual true story, is I was with the president of a university in a brand new $350 million building in the lobby, and he was introducing me and describing and showing it around, and 2 minutes later telling me how he was having difficulty getting $2 million for an online learning experience. And that has a lot to do with the infrastructure. We can capitalize the cost of a building, but we have to expense the cost of an online program. So the business of learning actually has an interesting impact on the pedagogy of learning.
I think a statistic you used earlier with me was that today only about 2% of spend on education is online. So given where we're going, that percentage will probably dramatically change. Where do you think we'll end up landing in terms of the in-person versus the online versus the more blended? Where do you think we'll go?
It's really interesting. A few months ago, I was at a talk by the Chief Innovation Officer of the state of Rhode Island, and he pulled up some statistics and showed that in the digital asset world, about 30% of the 30% of the spend was online, and showed a similar stat for the education world and showed that it was 2%. And I think it's an interesting outlook, right? Like, I don't think the 2% is going to 90%. But if over the next few years we saw that grow into high single digits, maybe low double digits, I think that's really interesting. I think that's it feels like in our lives we have digital everywhere, but when you look at education, it's still so small and there's so much opportunity.
Yeah, tremendous opportunity with that kind of statistic. So you work with everyone from edX to some of the best-known universities to simply online companies doing online learning. Do you want to speak to some of the commonalities between those client types, and then maybe some of the positives that you have seen with, like, for example, we spoke earlier about open source and edX and the benefits there, particularly from a community perspective. If you could speak to like some of the trends and the differences with your customer type, that would be great.
Absolutely. So at Extension Engine, we work with clients across the entire spectrum of life cycle of learning. So we have clients in K-12, we have higher ed clients, and we have continuing ed or adult ed clients. The one constant, I would say, is that those, frankly, artificial barriers between that are eroding over time. And it's actually happening pretty fast. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because if I'm a learner, it's very arbitrary that there's a gap between high school and college. I mean, that was invented by, some men back in, the 1800s at Harvard. But
it was based on farming.
It was based off of these odd things, right? And then somehow this idea that you would get 4 years or 6 years of higher ed learning and you were done and off for the rest of your career until you retired. I mean, it's an anachronism. So what we're seeing is those barriers are eroding, and we're seeing universities that are now providing online courses that are going deep into high schools. We're working with one institution that part of the process of applying to that institution is you have to provide a portfolio. And so working with high school students around the world to help them build a portfolio so that they can apply to the institution. It's really interesting. And there's also preparatory. So in grad schools, huge issue with graduate schools is students come in with different sort of levels of proficiency. And so having some preparatory material so that they can level up, and then the instructors are going to catch them at a similar point in their understanding, I think is really interesting. And then exec ed and the traditional sort of continuing education that you see from institutions of higher learning, you see corporations doing similar and same things. And the cool thing is at Extension Engine, we get to be involved in all those because the fact that we create these custom learning experiences, that we focus on a unique situation, like who's the learner, what are you trying to do, who's the instructor, and then craft the right solution for it. We get to see a lot of that, and I think it's I wake up every morning and I pinch myself that I get paid to do this.
So you're seeing a breakdown of this framework that we've been functioning within for a long time in terms of how
Very much so. Yeah, and it makes
how
sense.
education is delivered. So 2 quick questions. So if you had your crystal ball in front of you and you could look to 2050, what do you see in terms of where we're going, the future of education?
I definitely see that there's going to be more online. You're going to see more blended learning. The idea that, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like a remote student somewhere. I love the Minerva model, where they have students together in a cohort that moves around the world, so you get that personal bonding, and the instructors are remote, and you get the world's best instructor, and they will connect in to engage with that student body. So I think we'll see more interesting models like that, where you're getting that blended learning. And like you mentioned earlier, I think we're going to see a lot more competency-based, so unlocking us from seat time so that we can get credit for prior knowledge and that we can progress through content at the pace that's right for us as a learner. And I think the active and engaging learning. If you think back to those experiences where you really learned something, I know it's true for me and everybody I talk to, it's when I actually did it. If I did something, I remember it.
Yeah, the applied.
Totally applied learning. And everybody used to sort of say in the early days of online, they kind of poo-poo, I can't do anything online. That's not true anymore. You can do a lot online. We're working with Notre Dame to create their first online degree. It's a master's degree in data science. And it's amazing the kinds of things that we can do online. And so you get some principles, you talk about it with your colleagues, your classmates, and then you actually do it. And out of that you get both a portfolio, you get the experience. That's some really exciting stuff for me.
And you're building this broader community.
For sure, yeah. Especially around open source. The open source community in higher ed and continuing ed is amazing. As are the for-profit companies. So I see a lot of collaboration. You see it here today at Learn Launch. I mean, there's 1,000 people coming together to collaborate around this. So
very passionate group.
Better. It's a sunny morning in America.
It's still rising.
It's still rising. There's a metaphor in there somewhere.
So one last quick question, and then we'll finish. If there was one aspect of technology that you would like to see changed or be developed that is holding back, the likes of what Extension Engine does, what would that one change be?
Well, I think what's interesting to me is online, rightly so, was focused on asynchronous learning. So each student kind of engaging with the content when they wanted to. And that created some challenges, for example, around social. So, if I'm online and my fellow student's offline, it's hard to have a social engagement. Not impossible, but harder. What we're seeing now is more synchronous online, live video, live chats, and sometimes even like with IBM Watson, where you have an online synchronous human-computer interaction. So really cool online synchronous interactions, but it's still the frontier of innovation around online learning. Anybody who's tried to dial into a web conference has seen that. And so I think over the next couple of years, WebRTC adoption and other types of technology that will help advance that, create new interfaces between live and physical space. I think that's really interesting. And by the way, institutions, companies, there's a lot of money being invested, a lot of time being invested in this. And I think combining that live synchronous with the asynchronous, that's the future of online learning.
Do you think we'll ever have the hologram classroom where we're all showing up in spirit and image, but are all around the world?
Well, I sure hope so.
All right. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.